Radio 91.3 KDKR Decatur, Dallas, Fort Worth, and 91.3 KYJC Commerce.
Portions of KDKR programming do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, today, what you need to know if you have student loans. Today, we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon, this is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, there's a lot of new news in regards to student loans. What do you need to know? Today, Prudent Money contributor and college admissions expert John Hupalo is here to give us his take. Hey, John, every day that goes by over the last 30 days, I'm thinking, John and I got to talk about that. We got to talk about that. And you know, what I do, just so the listeners know, is when I know you're coming on, and you come on every month, I'm constantly throughout the month, if I see an article, I grab it and I save it. And I mean, I could not believe the amount of stories about what's going on with student loans. I've never seen it be so much.
Yeah, Bob, it's really quite amazing. And by the way, happy 4th of July. I hope you
yes, you as well.
some time for some relaxation there. But there was no time for those with student loans to relax, because you said it. There's just been a ton left, right, and center in this whole conversation. So, yeah, we got plenty to talk about today. We'll have some fun.
Well, let's start out with the borrower defense funds. And really, I think this is the first I've heard of this. Let me read a couple of paragraphs out of this article. A borrower defense to repayment means you have legal grounds to discharge federal student loans if your school misled you or engaged in other misconduct in violation of certain laws. As previously reported by Go Banking Rates, the initiative was unveiled on a new webpage launched by the U.S. Department of Education's Federal Student Aid Agency under the heading of Borrower Defense Loan Discharge. If the Education Department approves your application for borrower defense, the agency will discharge any remaining balance on the federal student loans you took out to attend the school. The department might also refund loan payments you've already made. Now, this just sounds like it's a story that's got all kinds of issues with it. I mean, first of all, what kind of misconduct constitutes the ability to discharge student loan debt? How they define that?
Yeah, Bob, this is really pretty phenomenal. The sort of just like set the big stage. Way back when, like say 10 or so years ago, it was nearly impossible to have a student loan discharged. And discharge is a fancy word. It means if you go through bankruptcy, they basically wipe the debt out. So with credit cards and some other loans, you could go through that process, and the judge says, yeah, you really don't have any money. You really can't make these payments. We'll settle this up, and we'll discharge some of them, or you can make some partial payments. But some judge kind of figured all that out. Well, what would happen if you had a student loan is the judge would say, okay, according to the law, you've got to prove that you have undue hardship. And that bar was really pretty high. So that was the whole thing around the bankruptcy. It was nearly impossible. By the way, Congress did this purposely. They didn't want just a student to be able to go to school for 4 years, show up and say, oh, by the way, I can't pay anymore, so I want to discharge my loans. And but the reason your listeners don't want to discharge their loans is when you have a discharge, your credit is basically ruined for about 7 years. It sticks there. Every time you go to borrow some money from a bank or for a mortgage or for another credit, it says, oh, by the way, this person went through bankruptcy discharge 6 or 5 or whatever years ago, and you should know that. And you can imagine that lenders don't want to know that somebody already discharged loans. So that's a little bit of a big lead up to this really important story that you're talking about. So away from all of that, there was a real problem, frankly, with some of the for-profit schools and some other schools where they were luring students in because they were just trying to get the student loan money. So they come in and say, oh, guess what, our tuition is $5,000 or $10,000. You can get more than half of that from the federal government, and so you should come to our program. And then the misrepresentations, and this is all documented, misrepresentation was like, our job placement rates are 100%, or they would lie about their accreditation that they might or might not have. They might say that their graduation rates were, significantly greater than they were. They might say, oh, you come over here and we're going to let you transfer some of your credits from your 2-year program, and then guess what? It didn't actually work out that way. Or this is the one that really was a serious problem. They would close the school before the student would graduate. The student would get in there for whatever the school program was, and just short of graduation, school would close, the borrower would be stuck with loans and no degree. So the Department of Education, way back when, 10, 15, maybe more years ago, said, well, we're going to set up an ability for borrowers to come and say, you know what, they have a borrower defense loan discharge. And if they were lied to, or the schools took them down the wrong road and they actually didn't graduate, or they were really just blatantly just lied to as basically a fraud, we're going to allow those students to escape that. And by the way, this is new to people, and sadly not me, because I've been following this for so long, but the Biden administration has already discharged about $14.5 billion worth of these loans. So it's new because there's another lawsuit that was just settled maybe a month or so ago, which is why you found it when you were hunting around for cool things to talk about. But there's another $6 billion of pending loans that will be eligible for discharge for another 200,000 borrowers. So they're going to discharge something on the order of $20 billion worth of these loans that arguably were made fraudulently or with some serious misrepresentations of the truth to the kids who are trying to do the right thing and get a degree.
You would think that there's, out of all the universities, colleges that are out there, that this was a small percentage of colleges that you could really, you could name the 15 or 20 colleges that this was happening, and you almost kind of have like a class action type suit against the college that would get you to the point where you could discharge your student loan debt. But I mean, is this widespread, or is this just a small percentage of bad apples?
Well, you're right. I'm going to say it's a widespread problem with a small percentage of bad apples, because the reality is there are thousands and thousands of great schools, but there are also a couple of hundred, and I think in one of the recent lawsuits it was like 150 schools were named in there. When we talk about schools, this is not like Credible College or Credible University in my hometown. They're kind of fringe players who really were kind of preying on people. But again, it's a small number percentage-wise, and 20 billion when you have trillions outstanding. That's probably not a lot statistically, but if you're one of those kids that was saddled with those loans, then this is like a really serious move in the right direction. And by the way, I used to have only a little bit of sympathy for these folks because I really did believe that there weren't a lot of bad actors until you realize there were enough bad actors that had really significant marketing campaigns and some great names. Like one of them was ITT. It was like it's a big name in the marketplace, or DeVry, big name in the marketplace. And they were found to be doing things that they really shouldn't have been doing, and a bunch of those loans for those schools were discharged, in addition to some of the truck driving schools and the beauty salons and all the rest of it. So the Department of Education has been on this, and this is one of the programs that they've really tried to put forth. And I think they would have done this even if their full student loan forgiveness program wasn't struck down by the court. They've been on this case for a long time, and they believe, and frankly, I believe too, they're helping a segment of borrowers who really did believe that they were going to get an education, and it didn't happen.
So is it fair to say, and it's kind of the irony of the story, is that the federal government set up the system that's causing all the fraud? in
100%.
in a sort of kind of weird way. You know what I mean?
Well, it's the same thing when the government goes after the student loan servicers and says, "Well, you haven't serviced these loans properly," and the student loan servicers come back and say, "By the way, we're servicing them according to the rules that you set out for the prices that you set out." And then the government says, "Well, the student loan servicers aren't doing this correctly." So yes, there's a lot of irony here, and there's a lot of politics. We talk about sound bites all the time, but yes, you're 100% right. They set up the program. And just like everything, if there's a program in place, it happened with the Paycheck Protection Program, it happens with every federal giveaway program, the scammers will figure out a way to get around it. And then somebody has to come and find a way to whack them to get them back in line.
Yeah, it's quite unbelievable. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. John Hupalo is with me today. If you want more information about John, mycollegecorner.com is where that you can go and get that information. Of course, you mentioned a little bit, kind of a lead up to that story, but really, I think unbelievable. Maybe a good thing, maybe not. I'm not sure. I'd like to get your take on it. But for so long, if you defaulted on that debt, the government would come back and tell you, "Hey, you can't charge this off in bankruptcy court. We've got you for your life. You'll always be in this debt." But now some things have been done to where students, in my understanding anyway, students can discharge some of this in this debt or all the debt in bankruptcy court. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This again is part of the Biden administration's program to just plain straight out make it easier for students to make payments, make it easier for them to escape repayment or full payment. And one of those is around that point that I made earlier about the undue hardship. And the undue hardship criteria, and there was set out in the law the bar to meet that undue hardship, and it was pretty significant. So the number of undue hardship discharges annually were very small. So back in December last year, December 2022, the Department of Justice issued what they're calling new guidance around discharging student loans. And what they're saying is, rather than have to go through that whole complicated legal process and get involved with all of these requests for adversary proceedings, and it was a very complicated process, they came back and said, "Well, look, we're gonna be the judges of this. So you can go, borrower who wants to get out of the debt, you want to find this way to get it discharged, you can fill out something they call an attestation form that tells you that you have an opportunity to present your case to the Department of Justice, and they'll make a determination of whether or not that will be discharged, that loan will be discharged under the law." So that's a really significant thing. Is again, it moved it out of the court system, which can be long and expensive, and moved it into the Department of Justice so that they would make that determination.
So do you think that this will cause any type of a spike in bankruptcy filings?
Well, Bob, this is a government program, so we know that with every government program, there's red tape and bureaucracy. So
Sure,
what I didn't tell you that this attestation form is 15 pages long. And, quite honestly, I don't think you want the bar to be too low so that, again, every student can just run in there. If it were low, every student run in there and say, "Oh, I really don't want to pay this, and here's my form." So it's 15 pages, and I read somewhere not all that long ago when this was first announced that it's like a 10-step process you have to go through. And so, I'm sure in a year or so from now we'll hear about how the criteria are too tough and folks are not qualifying, just like with the original forgiveness programs that came around. But anyway, there's a government program in place. They're trying to make it a little bit easier, but not super easy. And again, I actually wrote, I testified before Congress back in, I think it was 2007 or 8 or somewhere around there in that time frame. And I was on the side of the coin that said, we have to be really careful about making it too easy to discharge loans in bankruptcy. And it's for what I said before. Student comes out of school, they're 22, 23, 4 years old. They determine, oh, you know what, I've got all this massive debt. I'm making these payments are way too much. I'm just going to declare bankruptcy. I have no other assets, really. There's nothing anybody can take. I'll discharge the student loan, and I'll start over without that big debt. And the problem with that is what I said, is that follows you around now for 7 years. And I think the unintended consequences of taking a 25-year-old who could probably make the payments, they did that smart, and turn him into a 32-year-old who just now is getting out of the grips of that bankruptcy filing, that's an awful long time. And there's a lot of maturity goes on between 25 and 32. And I wouldn't want people scratching their heads at 28, 29, 30 saying, boy, that wasn't such a good thing because now I can't get a mortgage. I'm having trouble getting an apartment. I can't get a car loan, like whatever it might be. So I think we need to have the bar fairly high, make it a little bit more onerous for people to do it. But for those who really have the problem, give them a way to make their case at least.
So how do you feel about these new changes in the laws?
I come about this the same way every time, which is we have to see how they're actually implemented. And so you can go and read, on one side of the coin, people are saying this is way too easy and everybody's going to charge in there and get a discharge. And on the other side of the coin, they're going to say they're still making it too hard, so nobody's going to get a discharge and it's going to be pretty much the same. It's really a matter, unfortunately, of how the program, I'm going to say, is marketed, in air quotes. How are they actually positioning this? The Department of Justice want to come and say, hey, here's free discharge for everybody, and they get a slew of applications. That might be one thing. But I think the reality is the borrowers are going to have to think hard. And the other part of this, Bob, is the legs that the Department of Justice is sort of carrying is the other part of the Biden administration's view that they now have repayment programs in place. And some of these programs, it's called a Fresh Start program, actually, for people who are in default, where they can go make an application and basically start over with the process as long as they're making payments. I saw some statistics not too long ago that something like half the borrowers who are in this new Fresh Start repayment program are making no payments to start because they don't have enough income, and something like 60% of them are making payments less than $50 a month. So they're trying to make it easier, again, to go about it the right way so that students are having an opportunity to repay. And so I'll get on my horse that I ride every time you and I talk, which is if your listener has a loan or has a child with a loan or whatever it might be, call the student loan servicer and find out about what the right answer might be. Is there a new repayment program that makes more sense based on income? Are there other opportunities? But every case is different, and so to say, here's the answer for everybody would be foolish to try to talk about today.
Well, of course, the biggest news, which is no surprise, is that the student loan forgiveness program that Biden wanted to happen got struck down by the Supreme Court. Talk a little bit about what happened, what finally took place to get this off the table.
Yeah, I guess you and I are chuckling a little bit because this is like I probably should have gone and made a bet with someone the way this would come out. This is like way too predictable. From the time they heard the oral arguments right to the very end, there was almost no question the way this would come out. So what happened was, the Supreme Court voted 6-3, pretty much along partisan lines, as we might imagine, to strike down the president's proposed student loan forgiveness program. But it was really pretty significant because it was one or two of the justices felt so strongly out of the three that they went and read their dissent in the courtroom itself in the Supreme Court. And I didn't realize actually that was a thing, but apparently it is. And when somebody feels really strongly, they go and they read their dissent, which is what one or two of them did. But what's really interesting about this was not even done. I mean, the announcement was made. They talked about this a little bit, but there was like no real afterthought. First thing President Biden says, this is his quote, "Today's decision has closed one path. Now we're going to pursue another one." So he already has teed up another whole set of ways he thinks that he can go to get the same student loan relief. And this is the part, the reason I'm bringing this up, I actually chuckled to myself when I read this, because he said, this new path is legally sound. It's just going to take a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Okay, so they knew the first one was on sort of tough footing, and it took several years, and now this one's going to take a little bit longer. And the last part of this whole thing is that, Bob, on September 1st, student loan interest is beginning to accrue again for the first time in more than 3 years.
About 3.5 years.
4 years. Yeah, 3.5 years. And the first payments are going to be due on October 1st. So no matter what shenanigans go on between now and then, those bills are going to go out in September, and students are going to be expected, or graduates, the borrowers are going to be expected to make those payments starting October 1.
Okay, so talk about, I know we bring this up just about every time, but I just want to make sure everybody that needs this information gets it. What do you do if you're looking at your student loan bills, you know it's coming due October 1st, you can't pay it? And I think the good news is that there are people there to help you. Talk a little bit about that, just to make sure everybody knows.
Yeah, there are two things going on there. One is that everyone expects the first several months, or maybe even the first year of this repayment restart, to be a nightmare. So what the Department of Education has done said that they want to help borrowers get back, and they're calling it their on-ramp program. And they're saying basically for the next 12 months, if a borrower misses or provides a partial payment or a late payment, those payments will not be counted negatively on their credit. So that's a pretty significant start.
Yeah, it is pretty significant.
Yeah, it's a good idea to try to help people move that along. But to answer your question directly, call your student loan servicer. That is absolutely the best advice that anybody could give when it comes time. Make those payments. Can't make those payments, call and see if there is one of the new repayment programs based on how much income you have. They're asking right now between 10 and 20% of income, and income can be defined all kinds of different ways. So you need to call the student loan servicer, provide the facts, and might find out that you may have no payment due as a result of your current income, or some minimal payment due. So I think that's really the critical best answer. And as we've talked about before, studentaid.gov, which is the federal government's student loan area, and when you talked about that site a little bit earlier, I would go to studentaid.gov if you want any background information, these different repayment programs, what to do. If you go up there, they'll tell you have a problem paying, call your student loan servicer, the very first thing you should do.
Well, there was a lot of other things I wanted to cover, but we'll get it next time, because I'm sure it'll still be worth talking about. John, always great to have you on the program. Once again, his website, which is a great website, is mycollegecorner.com. John, thanks so much for coming on the program, and I will talk to you next month.
Look forward to it, Bob. Be well. God bless you.
God bless you. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. I kid you not, I collect information, and not really intentionally, just kind of what comes up. And it just seems like day after day, information kept coming up on student loans. It's because it's interesting. One of the reasons why I like to have John on the program is because of the volume of information that's out there and new news stories that come out. And this is a big, hot topic. And it's always, I guess it's going to be continue to be for a while as President Biden tries to get something done. This is Bob Brooks. You got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.